Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/BrianEDenton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 214. Chapter 214. Many historians say that the French did not win the Battle of Borodino because Napoleon had a cold, and that if he had not had a cold, the orders he gave before and during the battle would have been still more full of genius, and Russia would have been lost, and the face of the world would have been changed. To historians who believe that Russia was shaped by the will of one man, Peter the Great, and that France from a republic became an empire and French armies went to Russia at the will of one man, Napoleon, to say that Russia remained a power because Napoleon had a bad cold on the 24th of August may seem logical and convincing. If it had depended on Napoleon's will to fight or not to fight the Battle of Borodino, and if this or that other arrangement depended on his will, then evidently a cold affecting the manifestation of his will might have saved Russia, and consequently, the valet who omitted to bring Napoleon his waterproof boots on the 24th would have been the savior of Russia. Along that line of thought, such a deduction is indubitable as the deduction Voltaire made in jest, without knowing what he was jesting at, when he saw that the massacre of St. Bartholomew was due to Charles IX's stomach being deranged. But to men who do not admit that Russia was formed by the will of one man, Peter I, or that the French Empire was formed in the war with Russia begun by the will of one man, Napoleon, that argument seems not merely untrue and irrational, but contrary to all human reality. To the question of what causes historic events, another answer presents itself, namely, that the course of human events is predetermined from on high, depends on a coincidence of the wills of all who take part in the events, and that Napoleon's influence on the course of these events is purely external and fictitious. Strange as at first glance it may seem to suppose that the massacre of St. Bartholomew was not due to Charles IX's will, though he gave the order for it and thought it was done as a result of that order, and strange as it may seem to suppose that the slaughter of 80,000 men at Borodino was not due to Napoleon's will, though he ordered the commencement and conduct of the battle, and though it had been done as he ordered it. Strange as these suppositions appear, yet human dignity, which tells me that each of us is, if not more, at least not less a man than the great Napoleon, demands the acceptance of that solution of the question, and historic investigation abundantly confirms it. At the Battle of Borodino, Napoleon shot at no one and killed no one. That was all done by the soldiers. Therefore, it was not he who killed people. The French soldiers went to kill and be killed at the Battle of Borodino not because of Napoleon's orders, but by their own volition. The whole army, French, Italian, German, Polish, and Dutch, hungry, ragged, and weary of the campaign, felt at the sight of an army blocking the road to Moscow that the wine was drawn and must be drunk. Had Napoleon then forbidden them to fight the Russians, they would have killed him and have proceeded to fight the Russians because it was inevitable. When they heard Napoleon's proclamation offering them, as compensation for mutilation and death, the words of posterity about their having been in battle after Moscow, they cried, "Vive l'Empereur!" just as they had cried, "Vive l'Empereur!" at the sight of the portrait of the boy piercing the terrestrial globe with a toy stick, and just as they would have cried, "Vive l'Empereur!" at any nonsense that might be told to them. There was nothing left for them to do but cry, "Vive l'Empereur!" and go to fight, in order to get food and rest as conquerors in Moscow. So it was not because of Napoleon's commands that they killed their fellow men. And it was not Napoleon who directed the course of the battle, for none of his orders were executed, and during the battle he did not know what was going on before him. So the way in which these people killed one another was not decided by Napoleon's will, but occurred independently of him, in accord with the will of hundreds of thousands of people who took part in the common action. It only seemed to Napoleon that it all took place by his will. And so the question, whether he had or had not a cold, has no more historic interest than the cold of the least of the transport soldiers. Moreover, the assertion made by various writers that his cold was the cause of his dispositions not being as well planned as on former occasions, and of his orders during the battle not being as good as previously, is quite baseless, which again shows that Napoleon's cold of the 26th of August was unimportant. The dispositions cited above are not at all worse, but are even better than previous dispositions by which he had won victories. His pseudo-orders during the battle were also no worse than formerly, but much the same as usual. These dispositions and orders only seem worse than previous ones because the Battle of Borodino was the first Napoleon did not win. The profoundest and most excellent dispositions and orders seem very bad, and even learned militarists criticize them with looks of importance when they relate to a battle that has been lost, and the very worst dispositions and orders seem very good, and serious people will fill whole volumes to demonstrate their merits when they relate to a battle that has been won. The dispositions drawn up by Weyrother for the Battle of Austerlitz were a model of perfection for the kind of composition, but still they were criticized for their very perfection, for their excessive minuteness. Napoleon at the Battle of Borodino fulfilled his office as representative of authority as well as, and even better than, at other battles. He did nothing harmful to the progress of the battle. He inclined to the most reasonable opinions. He made no confusion, did not contradict himself, did not get frightened, or run away from the field of battle, but with his great tact and military experience carried out his role of appearing to command, calmly and with dignity. That concludes my reading of chapter 214. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 214. A Great Wind. The Sopranos is the greatest television show of all time. It contains heart and heady violence, perfectly balancing comic absurdity with brutal tragedy. One of its best episodes occurs early in its final season when Tony Soprano, the show's mobster antihero, emerges from a gunshot-induced coma. During this coma, he experiences a series of hallucinatory, spiritually awakening dream vignettes. When he awakens, he finds, among his bedside collection of get-well cards, a mysterious note that relates an Ojibwe proverb. Sometimes I go about in pity for myself, and all the while a great wind carries me across the sky. It is never revealed who shared this card with Tony, but, for a time at least, it stirs a moral revolution in his soul. He's more calm and contemplative, as if allowing the Ojibwe wind to carry him where it will. The final sequence in the episode has Tony in his backyard peacefully admiring the gentle breeze wafting through the trees above. Across town, carried by this same benevolent wind, Tony's underling, Polly Walnuts, smashes an innocent man's kneecaps with a baseball bat. It's a brilliant sequence in a series of brilliant sequences. Many credit the show's creator, David Chase, as being the single genius who caused the show's great success, much like how Tolstoy, in today's chapter, says that the historians credit Napoleon as being the single genius behind the Battle of Borodino. But the Battle of Borodino, as Tolstoy points out, could not have occurred without the coordinated will of thousands of soldiers. Likewise, neither could The Sopranos have reached the heights of brilliance it did without the coordinated efforts of many cast and crew members. You could say that it is the Ojibwe wind, rather than any great man, that produces a television show, or sets the stage for a battle. That's certainly what Tolstoy is up to here. In doing so, he's setting up one of the big questions he asks later in the second epilogue. How do we reconcile history's ostensible deterministic fatalism with the individual's apparent freedom of will? What are the consequences for human behavior if it's true that the Ojibwe wind directs us? Daily Meditation. By remembering, then, that I am part of such a whole, I shall be content with everything that happens. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. That concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 214 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow, we will be reading and reflecting on chapter 215. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.